Hi, welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. I'm David Sneathen. I'm going to tell you a story. Yay! I still have Circle of Death, so I think that it started. I really don't know. So, anyway, I'm David Sneathen. I'm going to tell you a story. This is Heavy D Storytelling. We're going to start with the Book of Mark. We have 4 chapters left in the Book of Mark. We're on chapter 13. And then we're going to read chapter 16 of the Bronze Bow. I see 2 of you are already here. Hi, Kimmy. It's so good to see you tonight. So this is, how are you? I'm great. Um, this is later than I'm used to reading, but it is okay. So I am doing well. How are you? Hope you're doing well also. I just lost my something. There we go. Okay, good. Yay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is the English Standard Version. This is Mark chapter 13. And here we go. And as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished?" And Jesus began to say to them, "See that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of the birth pains. But be on your guard, for they will deliver you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them. And the gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations. And when they bring you to trial and deliver you over, do not be anxious beforehand what you are to say, but say whatever is given to you in that hour, for it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. And brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. But when you see the abomination of desolation, that's actually a reference to the book of Daniel, standing where he ought not to be, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down, nor enter his house to take anything out. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that it may not happen in winter, for in those days there will be such tribulation as has not been from the beginning of the creation that God created until now, and never will be. And if the Lord had not cut short the days, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. And then, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'Look, there he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be on guard. I have told you all things beforehand. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the 4 winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, When you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But concerning that day or that hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, keep awake, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, stay awake. That's the end of chapter 13. And tomorrow we will read chapter 14. So, hope everybody is enjoying our Bible reading. Oh, wow, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of activity. Hi, Granny Bear. Hi, family. Still making dinner. We'll join y'all later. Lots of clapping and praying, I think. More clapping. I think that's clapping. I don't know what all these icon things are. Okay, so now we're on chapter 16. So in chapter 15, Daniel is starting to follow Jesus around, and he goes in the morning to the lake where the fishermen are, and he listens to Jesus there. And then in the evening, he goes to, I think it's Simon's house, um, where Jesus is teaching, and the apostles all know him by name, Daniel, and so that's what he's doing. Praise and high fives. Okay, super. Yeah, I don't really speak emoji, so it is what it is. So that's what's been going on. Also, Thrace has been, not Thrace, sorry, Leah has been asking questions about all of his journeys. So he's been telling some of the stories and some of the things that have been happening during the time while he's been with Jesus. So we are going to go ahead and get started, see if we can get through 2 chapters. I know the first one is kind of long. The second one's not too bad. So, okay. Chapter 16. I'll do anything, Daniel. You know that. Anything. Joel's voice shook with earnestness. His eyes, in the flickering lamplight, were fixed on his friend's face. The three sat crouched in the narrow passageway of Joel's home. Earlier that day, Joel had received a summons by messenger from Rosh. He had climbed to the cave, and then, after a brief conference, had gone straight to the city. Shortly before dark, Joel and Thacia had crept through the passageway to join him. Daniel brought with him the long-awaited orders from Rosh to Joel. At first, waiting in the dark passageway, Daniel had battled with his own jealousy, that Joel should have the first chance to act, while he himself, the one who had brought Joel in as a recruit, should stand aside and wait. But now he was beginning to see the thing reasonably. This was only the beginning. Rosh needs some information, he told his eager friend. You're the only one who can get it, Joel. You know your way around the city, and everyone is used to seeing you. None of the rest of us could get near. What does Raj want? I'll get it, whatever it is. Daniel told him, his voice echoing the contempt with which Galileans always spoke of the Tetrarch, the half-Jew Herod Antipas, who had been appointed to rule over them, and of the extravagant city he had built on the sea. Pull that down just a little. Okay. Herod is entertaining a special legation from Rome. While they're at Tiberias, they plan to come up to Capernaum for a day or so to inspect the garrison here. For some people, the rich ones who toady to Rome, that will be a great occasion. Mattathias, the banker, is giving a banquet for the whole legation, and some of the richest men in Capernaum will be there. Mattathias will do anything to gain favor with the Tetrarch, said Joel with a scorn. How does Rosh know about the banquet? Don't ask me how. He has his own ways. What he wants to know is what others will be there, the names of all of them, and the day and the time when the banquet will take place. Joel nodded. I can see why. It would give us a good idea which men would be against us. Any Jew who would eat at the Tetrarch's table. That's it. We need to know our enemies as well as our friends. Is that all I have to do? Just find out those things? Joel looked disappointed. You may not find it so easy. Rosh didn't have any idea how you'd go about it. He left all that to you. How will I get the word to Rosh? Asked Joel, looking flattered. I'll take care of that. Bring what you find to me, or send it by one of the band, someone we can trust. I'll see that it gets to Rosh. Joel's eyes began to sparkle at the thought of intrigue. Let's see, he began. It doesn't really help that people know me here. That kind would hold their tongues because of father. I don't think I'd find out a thing. Besides, Mattathias and father don't speak to each other. No, the servants are the ones to talk to. If I could get into the servants, if I could sell something, fish, Thesha broke in. You could get all the fish you want from Simon and Andrew. At moments like this, caught up in the same excitement, the brother and sister were unmistakably twins. Good idea, Joel flashed. I'll get a basket full of extra fine ones and peddle them for a good price. I can say I'll take orders for any special occasion. You know how the kitchen slaves talk about a party. I'm sure it'll work. Struggling with envy again, Daniel sat silent. Joel was too excited to wonder why he, the youngest of the group, should have been given the assignment. The truth was, Daniel knew, Rosh had no one else to send. The band in the mountains boasted more muscle than wit. How far would he himself get with his smith's shoulders and his country manners? Joel had to be the one. Then, watching Joel's rapt, flushed face, Daniel felt not envy but unexpected misgiving. If anything went wrong, he glanced at Thacia. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw his own doubt suddenly mirrored. Joel, he said, you don't have to do this. Rosh has no right to order you. Why hasn't he? If he asked you, it's different with me. Why is it different? I'm a nobody. You have your future to think of, and your father and mother and Thacia. No, said Thacia quickly, not me. I took the oath with you, remember? Only Daniel. Is is this a dangerous thing? Stop fussing, both of you, said Joel with new importance. Let me think. I can get the fish early before it's light, but suppose father finds out I'm not in school. Perhaps I could ask him for a holiday. Thacia leaned forward. Joel, I have an idea. What if you and Daniel were seen going out of the city tomorrow morning? Suppose you passed the guards and even spoke to them, so if we needed, people could swear they had seen you. Wouldn't that leave you free to do anything you like? Joel stared at his sister, and then his face came alive like hers. Thace, why didn't I think of it? Would you do it, honestly? You know I would. As always, Daniel was baffled by the swiftness with these two with which these two caught up each other's thoughts and left him stumbling behind. I don't see, he said, annoyed. Joel laughed. We've done it plenty of times in the past, just for the fun of it. When we were little and her hair was short, we used to change clothes, and sometimes we fooled the neighbors, the nearsighted ones at least. Of course, she's shorter now, but unless we stand side by side, who would notice? Daniel caught on. You mean, of course, Joel interrupted him, as he did his sister, without realizing it. Thace wears my clothes, and with her hair back under the turban, who's to know she's not a boy? Then you two go about together. I'll arrange for a day off. You could go, oh, somewhere out of the city would be best, where we're not too well known. We'll go to visit Leia. I've been wanting to for days. In the face of their enthusiasm, Daniel's scruples melted. Before he crept out of the passageway and set out for the village, the three had agreed to meet next morning by the boats of Simon and Andrew. Before dawn, Daniel joined the farmers on the road to the city. At the harbor, the usual crowd waited hopefully by the fishing boats. As he drew nearer, two boys moved from the rest and came to meet him. One was a sturdy barefoot fisherman in a rough cotton tunic, his throat and arms bare. The other made Daniel gasp. Beneath a close-bound turban was half hidden a second Joel, younger, smooth-faced, more finely drawn, but with the same lustrous eyes. Thacia tipped back her head for Daniel's scrutiny in a gesture that reminded him of Leah. It's not quite so perfect as it used to be, she admitted cheerfully. We'd better keep away from the marketplace. Once out of town, I'll be safe. Both brother and sister were relishing their conspiracy. Their high spirits made his own doubts seem niggardly. Joel had already arranged for a consignment of fish and had them hidden under a half-upturned boat, packed under fresh green leaves in a woven basket. Presently he set off with a swaggering step and a wide grin. Then Thacia took control with a brisk efficiency that surprised Daniel. "We'll go this way," she directed. "We won't be so likely to meet anyone." "Aren't you going to wait?" Daniel asked, surprised. "Jesus will be here soon." A slight cloud darkened her face. "No," she said, "not this morning. I'd rather get out of the city." "I thought you meant to be seen." "Yes, well, I don't want to meet anyone face to face." She hurried him along unfamiliar streets toward the gates of the city. For a time they walked in silence, and then Thacia spoke. "It isn't really that I'm afraid to be seen," she said honestly. "I didn't want to wait for Jesus. I didn't want to see his face when he saw me like this." Daniel was surprised. Then he remembered dimly the ancient law that forbade a man and woman to wear each other's garments. "Aren't you worried about the law?" he asked. "I don't think Jesus—" "Oh, the law," she replied. "Joel and I have broken so many laws lately that one more wouldn't matter." She paused, embarrassed, because he must know that any laws she and Joel had broken had to do with their visits to Daniel's house. Then she hurried on. "It's just that I don't want to face Jesus with a lie. I couldn't bear the way his eyes would look at me. If he understood the reason, he wouldn't blame you." "Yes, I think he would," she said thoughtfully. "I think that for Jesus a lie is impossible, no matter what the reason." "In war, a lie is a weapon," said Daniel. "We have to use what weapons we have. Even Jesus must see that." "I don't think he would see it at all," said Thacia. She walked on a little way, then she spoke again. "Daniel, what makes you and Joel so sure that Jesus means to make war?" "He says that the kingdom is at hand. What else can he mean?" "Did you ever think he might mean that the kingdom will come some other way, without any fighting?" "You mean just wait forever, like your father says?" Thacia's forehead wrinkled in an effort to put her thoughts into words. "Not exactly. You see, Jesus has made me see that we don't need to wait for God to care for us. He does that now, every one of us. Jesus says that God sees into our hearts and loves us. If everyone understood that, every man and woman, would that rid us of the Romans? Suppose the Romans too could understand." He stopped on the road and stared at her. "Romans? You think God loves the Romans?" Thacia, Thacia sighed. "That's impossible, I suppose. Then why does he say that we must love our enemies?" "He is talking to men. A girl can't understand such things." He said it rudely, and too loudly, because Thacia's words had come close to his own secret doubts. So loudly that two passers-by turned to stare at them, and Thacia lowered her head and hurried her steps. When she spoke again, she changed the subject. "This thing that Joel is doing, is it dangerous? I don't quite understand it. Why does Rosh want those names?" "I don't think it's dangerous," he told her, not quite truthfully. "Joel thinks fast. Don't worry about him." The last part of her question he did not answer. He did not want to admit that he could not see why Rosh wanted the names. Thacia was only too willing to accept his assurance, and at once she was confident again. They left the stone houses behind them, passed through the wall of Capernaum, taking special care to greet the sentries, and took the broad road that led north into the hills. All at once Daniel's muscles tensed. He had seen, just ahead, two figures in the familiar metal helmets. Two soldiers rested beside the road, their heavy packs in the dust. One of them sat on the stone wall, his spear leaning beside him. The other was adjusting the strap of his sandal. But he glanced up now, and Daniel saw that it was too late even to consider turning back. "They're sure to speak to us," he cautioned Thacia under his breath. "What if they do?" she asked. "That's what I came for, to be seen." "All the same, you let me do the talking." The two soldiers watched their approach with interest. "The gods have done us a favor after all," one of them said. Didn't I predict it?" "It's more than you deserve," said the other. "But who's to question the gods? Here, boy!" With a snap of his finger he indicated the two packs. A quick upward jerk of his elbow made his orders clear. Black anger rose in Daniel. He knew well enough the law that allowed a Roman to command that a Jew carry his burden for 1 mile, but the man didn't live who could make him shoulder a Roman pack. He looked squarely at the soldier, then he spat deliberately. The blow across his mouth came instantly and staggeringly, but he did not lower his head. The second soldier got to his feet easily, carelessly, his eyes watchful. There was a stifled gasp. Then Thacia very quietly stepped forward and lifted one of the packs. It was heavier than she had expected, and she paused a second, then made another try, and hoisted it awkwardly to her shoulders. The soldiers waited. Daniel stood in helpless fury. Then, for the first time in his life, he bent his neck to the Roman yoke and picked up the second pack. He wanted to weep for shame. The blood pounded in his temples. He did not know which he hated more, the two soldiers or the girl who walked beside him, who had tricked him into this humiliation. He looked at her from the corner of his eye. She was walking at a fair pace, only a slight stagger betraying the effort. Let her stumble, let her fall, and see if he cared. In a moment he looked sideways again. He saw the drops of moisture that clung to her forehead and trickled down her chin. Suddenly shame for her flooded over his own. "Thacia, put it down," he muttered, shifting closer to her. "I'll take mine and come back for it." "Nothing of the kind," she panted. "Keep quiet. Don't talk." The two soldiers ambled behind them, chatting good-naturedly to each other, as though the two pack-bearers were mules. Finally they reached the milestone. By rights, the soldiers could have made them go on, since they had taken the burdens well within the limits of the last stone, but Thacia's pace had become irksome, and it was obvious that, though willing, she could do no better. So the owner of her pack shouldered it himself, and less willingly the other let Daniel off also, with a parting blow on the ear for his sullenness. They strode ahead along the road, and Thacia sank down on the grass, rubbing her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked finally, not looking at her. "No thanks to you. What possessed you, Daniel?" Daniel scowled down at the road. "The very sight of them makes me lose my head. Filthy foreigners. If you hadn't been with me, you'd have lost your silly head for good. How would that serve your country?" "All right," he burst out. "I made a fool of myself. Do you want me to go back now?" "Certainly not." She sprang to her feet. "I want to see Leah." They went on, Daniel keeping Daniel keeping his eyes on the road ahead, but presently stealing a furtive look at the girl beside him, Daniel discovered that she was looking directly at him. "I might as well be honest, Daniel," she said unexpectedly. "Back there, I was proud of you. Scared to death, but proud of you. If I were a boy, I hope I'd have the courage." The frank words took Daniel by surprise. He could feel the pleasure of them spreading, warm as wine, along his veins. He had never had much praise in his life. He didn't know what to make of it. As they climbed the first rise from the plain, a breeze stirred their hot faces. On every side the land stretched, brown and parched under the summer sun. Here and there a solitary thresher still moved in a field, tossing the grain in great forkfuls into the air, letting the breeze catch the chaff while the heavy grain fell back to the ground. Presently they reached the village. Outside his own door Daniel knocked and called out, and presently the bolt inside was quietly drawn back. As Daniel pushed open the door, Thacia stood back. "I have brought a friend of yours with me," Daniel announced. Leah, from the corner where she had retreated at the first glimpse of an unfamiliar figure, stared out into the road. Then her face lighted. "Thacia!" she cried. "Why are you dressed in Joel's clothes?" Thacia came into the room, laughing and pushing back the hot turban with relief. "It's lucky everyone doesn't have your sharp eyes," she said. "You won't give me away, will you? It's a sort of game we're playing." Thacia came forward slowly. "Daniel never plays games," she said soberly. "What a pity," said Thacia lightly. "Joel and I pretend all sorts of things, but I'll tell you a secret. Your brother doesn't. Your brother does know how to smile. Quite nicely, actually. He doesn't always hide behind that fearful scowl." Unexpectedly, Leah giggled, and then both girls were laughing. Scowling more fiercely than ever, Daniel stamped into his shop, but he left the door open behind him. In Thacia's light-hearted presence, Leah was a different girl altogether. As he worked, Daniel caught between the hissing of the forge and the blows of his hammer the sound of their voices, and over again Leah's soft laughter. When he crossed the room for a tool he could see them, the two heads, dark and fair, bent over a bit of sewing. He found a good many excuses for walking across the shop that morning. At noon they ate their meal together. Leah spread out with pride the hard bread and the olives and the inferior dates, not knowing how meager the fare really was. With every bite, Daniel remembered the fine white cloth, the damask couches, the wine in alabaster cups, but Thacia seemed to have forgotten. What was there about her, he wondered, a sort of naturalness that made her seem without the slightest effort to belong, no matter where she happened to be, on the mountain, in the luxury of her home, among the fishing boats. Her gaiety touched with a special grace everything around her. Leah had begun to clear the dishes when some sound distracted her. Daniel, leaning back on his elbows, only half awake in the heavy heat, caught first the look on his sister's face. She was staring through the open door of the shop, and a deep flush was rising slowly from her throat to her pale temples. Daniel sat up. Then he caught the flash of sunlight on a helmet. The pleasure of the moment exploded like a bubble. In an instant he was on his feet, had flung himself into the shop, and slammed the door shut behind him. He had thought he had seen the last of the blond Roman. What had brought the man back? Curse him too for choosing to bring his work in the heat of the day. In a black humor he blew up the fire. When the shadows began to lengthen in the little room, they all knew with regret that the visit must end. Before they set out for the city, Daniel took Thacia into his shop. "You have brought so many gifts to Leah," he said, trying to choose his words carefully. "Would you let me give one to you?" He reached into a deep niche in the wall and drew out a small object wrapped in a fragment of Leah's blue cloth. Awkwardly he laid in Thacia's hand the little brooch. "I made it with a bit of scrap," he said. Thacia stood looking down at it. "A bronze bow!" she whispered. "Do you remember? It was you who thought of it that night, that the bronze bow might mean something, some impossible thing, the thing we could not do alone. I never forgot it. I don't know how to say it, but it came to stand for everything we are working for our oath, for the kingdom." He had never seen Thacia before when she could not speak. He would remember as long as he lived the look that sprang into her eyes, and was quickly hidden as she bent her head. Then her words came hurrying out. "To think that you made it!" she exclaimed, her voice shaky. "Why, you ought to be a silversmith, Daniel. You shouldn't be working with these great chunks of iron." "I'd like to try," he confessed. "Perhaps some day, when we are at peace." It was the first time he had ever voiced his ambition, even to himself. They set out together along the road, Thacia with the turban snugly about her head once more. "Every time I come, Leah's changed," she told him. "It's like watching a flower opening very slowly. From week to week I can hardly wait to see how it has opened since I saw her last. It is due to you, Daniel told her humbly. She has never had a friend before. After you leave, I see her trying to do things the way you do them. Thacia smiled at him. Little things, she said. Her hair, and the way she folds her veil. That's not what I mean. She does almost all the work in the house now, he went on, but there are days when she goes back. He was grateful for a chance to speak of this to someone. Days when she doesn't pay any attention. It's hard for me to have patience enough. Thacia smiled again. No, no one would ever take you for a patient man, she said. But do you think Joel and I do not know what you have done for Leah? Daniel's gratitude went out to her. He would like to think he had done something to make up for those years. She is so lovely, Thacia went on thoughtfully. I can't believe there are really any demons in her. Have you ever asked a physician? The one in the village said there was no cure for her. Once there was a man traveling through the country who had magic power to heal, and my grandmother paid him to look at Leah. He could do nothing. He could not do anything either. He said that the demons that make a person afraid are the hardest to cast out. He said something queer. Leah was only a child, but he said that she did not want to be made well. Thacia was silent for a moment. I have heard Jesus say something like that, when people ask him to cure them. Once there was a lame man on a litter. Jesus bent over him and looked right into his face and asked him, Do you want to be whole? It seemed such a queer question. Would anyone want to stay crippled? Daniel hesitated. This was something he had thought about, walking alone in the dark, silent road from Bethsaida. He was not sure of his own thoughts. Haven't you ever wondered, he attempted, what good it is for them to be healed, those people that Jesus cures? They're happy at first, but what happens to them after that? What does a blind man think when he has wanted for years to see and then looks at his wife in rags and his children covered with sores? That lame man you saw, is he grateful now? Is it worth it to get on his feet and spend the rest of his life dragging burdens like a mule? I never thought of it that way, said Thacia, her eyes clouding. Is that why, do you think, that so many of them aren't cured? The thought was troubling to them both. They walked on in uncertain silence. Then Thacia's naturally happy spirits reasserted themselves. Have you thought, Daniel, of taking Leah to Jesus? Yes, I've thought of it, but I don't see how I could get her to Capernaum without frightening her to death. She asked once if Jesus would ever come to our village, but I don't suppose she would really have the courage. When he comes, if she will not go to him, then you must ask him to come to your house with you. He often goes with people, you know, to the centurion's house, or to some rich man's. Do you really think that would make the slightest difference to Jesus? No, no, I guess it wouldn't. But somehow I wonder. It's the same as the lame man. It's not much of a world, is it? Is it worth trying to bring Leah back into it? Thacia stood still in the road. Yes, she cried, and Daniel was astounded to see that tears had sprung into her eyes. Oh, Daniel, yes, if only I could make you see, somehow, that it is. All this, she exclaimed, the sweep of her arm, including the deepening blue of the sky, the shining lake in the distance, the snow-covered mountain far to the north. So much. You must look at it all, Daniel, not just at the unhappy things. Suddenly she reached out and touched his hand. Look, she whispered. He lifted his head and followed her gaze. Overhead, barely discernible against the blue of the sky, a long gray shadow hung suspended. Cranes, hundreds of them, were passing in a great phalanx. They wheeled and caught the sun, flashing light from banks of white feathers with a shimmering like the snow on the mountain. Motionless, the two watched till the line slowly melted into the distant air. Thacia let out her breath. How beautiful, she sighed. It is beautiful just to be alive in Galilee. Daniel looked down at her. Her head was still thrown back, her lips parted. He could see the pulse beating under the smooth ivory skin, and somehow the line of her throat was one with the long slow arc of the birds in flight. She was aware all at once of his look, and then that their hands were joined. Red surged up into the smooth cheeks, and she drew her hand away. For a moment neither of them moved, and then they both began to hurry, almost to run. At the junction of the road they passed two more Roman sentries, but this time the men did not speak or even take notice of two dusty boys. For once Daniel felt almost grateful to a Roman. Tonight he could not have borne to watch Stacia shoulder a pack. Chapter 17. This time, the villagers said, as Daniel halted the blows of his hammer, Rosh has gone too far. How do you know it was Rosh? Daniel inquired, keeping his eyes on the axe he was mending. Is there any other man in Galilee who would dare such a thing? 5 of the wealthiest houses in the city robbed last night. But how would he find out? That's what I can't see. How would he know off there on the mountain that Mattathias was giving a banquet, or which men would have taken half their slaves to make a showing? None of the rest of us even knew the Tetrarch was coming. Then how can you think it was Rosh? I don't have to think. The legionaries found out. Rosh might have got away with it if he'd been satisfied with the loot from the houses, but no, he had to make a night of it. Daniel started. Was there more to the story that had not yet reached him? Hand on the bellows, he waited. They tried the house of the centurion himself. He might have known the centurion wouldn't leave his house unguarded. Most likely, the cutthroats got careless when they found the other houses such easy picking. 2 of them were captured. Both escaped convicts anyway, they say. One died as soon as they started to question him, but the other told before they finally made an end of him. Which, Daniel wondered sickly, which of the men he had lived with side by side in the cave? I say they deserved what they got. Nothing but a pack of thieves up there, for all the fine talk we used to hear. Not for a moment could Daniel let such a statement pass in his shop. Rosh is no bandit, he said. When he robs, it is for a good purpose. So I've heard. Rob the rich to feed the poor. I'll be glad to see the poor that gets 1 penny of what he took last night. There may be more important needs, said Daniel. Like filling his own stomach? We'll see if he's satisfied now. We'll see if he lets our crops alone. I'll believe you when we can trust our sheep on the mountain. Daniel started up the bellows and cut off the rest of the man's complaint. This was the 3rd man since morning who had brought the news that had slithered out from the city like a swarm of snakes to every village round about. Some men praised Rosh's daring, elated to see the rich men defrauded, but more, like this man, were indignant. At the first news, Daniel's spirits had soared, then on the heels of rejoicing had come doubt. Now, at the end of the day, he felt dull and let down. This, then, had been the reason for Joel's enterprise? A wholesale looting of rich men's houses. Somehow both boys had expected something more noble, more worthy of the cause. What did Joel think of it? Was it worth the hours lost from his study? The danger? No question what Joel thought. That night the meeting in the watchtower was jubilant. Bit by bit the boys from the city had garnered every crumb of news to relate to the village boys. Joel was a hero twice over. Not only had he furnished all the information that had made the raid possible, he had even returned this morning to the very doors of the robbed houses to listen to the full story from the unsuspecting kitchen slaves. I'm going to keep at it, he boasted. It would be a shame to give up such an opening. I've got a special order from the centurion's head steward, 2 dozen fish every 2nd and 4th day of the week. There's no telling what I may chance on. He was far too elated to notice Daniel's silence. Is Rosh in danger? One of the boys asked. The yellow rat who was caught. Yellow? Another boy objected. Do you know what the Romans do to a man? How long do you think you could keep quiet? There was an uncomfortable pause. This was a doubt they all faced in the night, in their own secret thoughts. They did not often speak of it. "Don't worry about Rosh," Daniel assured them. "The Romans have put a price on Rosh's head for years, have had a price on Rosh's head for years. It, it's another matter to lay a finger on him." Questions broke out again. What would Rosh do with the money? Would he buy arms with it? Would he divide it among the farms, maybe pay back for some of the sheep that he'd killed? There were so many needs for the money. Daniel sat silent while they debated passionately the greatest needs for the stolen goods. "Leave that to Rosh," he broke in finally. "It is for the cause." The argument ended. They were perfectly satisfied, looking at the circle of intense, swarthy faces, at the flashing eyes, feeling the unquestioning loyalty that bound them all to Rosh. Daniel cursed his own heavy misgivings. Why could he not be satisfied with his own answer? Nor were the villagers satisfied. Every day in the shop, in the marketplace, at the door of the synagogue, one heard the name of Rosh, sometimes bitterly condemned, sometimes hotly defended. At last Rosh's name was on every lip, as he had once predicted. Some swore he was the defender of the Jews, but others pointed out that he had turned against Jews. But though they muttered, most men clung with blind faith to Rosh. They still looked to the mountain as the stronghold of freedom and hope. The relay of messages which had succeeded so well, excuse me, was now intensified. Joel threw himself into the role of fish peddler, and with experience he grew more shrewd in interpreting the bits of gossip, the signs of activity that he picked up in the doorways and kitchens of the city. Because he could not often leave home in the evening, other members of the band brought the messages to Daniel's shop. At night Joktan crept down the slopes like a jackal, across the cucumber field to the watchtower and back to Rosh with the day's report. A mounting excitement filled the watchtower where boys met nearly every night in the week. Here at last was something to do. Now they could see the results of their work, for the results were never far behind. Rosh had acquired at last the link with the city for which he had waited. The boys had given him a weapon he needed, and he struck far and wide. With suddenness and cunning, Joel learned of a Galilean merchant who was expected to deliver 7 crusses of oil to the centurion's household on the morrow. Though the merchant set out from his vineyard before dawn, neither he nor his oil was ever seen again. A bridegroom, son of the wealthiest elder in the synagogue, left the city with a gala party of his friends, laden with gifts to calm his bride in Sepphoris. The bride waited in vain. Next day the whole party returned to their homes, clad only in their tunics, bereft of their handsome cloaks, their gifts, almost of their senses. A holiday party, returning late by torchlight from the games in the theatre at Tiberias, was routed, stripped, and badly beaten. For none of these victims did the boys feel the slightest pity. Any trader who sold his goods to the Romans did so at his own risk. Those who flaunted their wealth or patronized a Roman theatre were fair prey, and every cruse of oil, every silver talent swelled the fund that would soon maintain the army of Israel. As Rosh grew bolder, caravans and travelers increased their protection. The mountain outlaws also suffered losses. 2 more men fell into Roman hands, 3 were secretly buried after night attacks, and 4 more nursed wounds in the cave. Rosh needed more recruits. Thus it came about that the boys were admitted at last into Rosh's active service, and came to see the action they had craved. Not the trained army that Daniel had dreamed of marching to confront Rosh, only a guerrilla force of 19 eager boys. They met at the watchtower, coming one by one, crawling on hands and knees through the tangled vines to wait, on fire with impatience, for a summons from Rosh. Throughout the village there was a sudden rash of bandages. Boys limped with a swagger, leered smugly through purpled eyelids, and grinned through swollen lips. To harass the Romans was their real delight. A pilfered bit of Roman equipment, a spur, a leather gauntlet, was a prize worth risking one's neck for. One city boy who had made off with a helmet, even while a legionary who had laid it aside, stooped to take a drink at the well, was almost as great a hero as Joel himself. Much of all this Daniel watched with dismay. It was not for this sort of skirmishing that he had dreamt of raising a band. To him, many of the exploits they boasted seemed childish. It had been his plan to wait, to train, to grow strong, and then to strike. This activity was like a fire lighted too soon. Would it burn itself out before the day had come? But even he was proud of the catapult. Two boys brought word of it one evening, rushing into the shop out of breath. "Right on the road they've left it," one of them panted. "Only two guards. It's one of the big engines they used in the siege of Sepphoris. A wheel crumbled and they've had to leave it there till morning." "I'll tell Rosh," said Daniel, laying down his hammer. "Wait, let's take care of this one ourselves," the other boy suggested. "What could Rosh do with a catapult?" "Come on, Daniel, we discovered this. Why can't we have some of the fun for ourselves? We can stuff it with oiled rags and set fire to it. What a bonfire that would make!" "Enough to be seen for miles," Daniel reminded him. "Not use No use to burn good wood. We're in need of supplies, not bonfires." "We'll take it apart then," they decided. Before he could make up his mind, they had taken the lead out of his hands. The word went out. Hurriedly they scrambled together weapons, files from the shop, chisels, and mallets. One at a time, by various routes, they made their way to a point overlooking the Via Maris, and looked down at the monster that crouched there like an unearthly beast in the darkness. "What do you suppose they're moving that thing for?" someone whispered. "I've a good idea," Daniel answered. "It's the kind of thing Herod used against the caves at Arbela." "You think they'd dare to attack Rosh?" "If he makes enough trouble for them." "All the more reason," said the boy. "We'll do away with it." "Wait," cautioned Daniel. "The guards are not to be killed. It would mean death in the village. I'll take one of them. Nathan takes the other. The way I've taught him." Before the guard knew that anyone was near, Daniel had one arm about his throat. When the man lay, stunned and gagged, Daniel relieved him of spear and dagger. A moment later a sharp whistle announced that the second guard was also overcome. One by one, shadowy figures crept from the rocks and surrounded the monster. They worked silently, muffling under their cloaks the rasp of the file and the chipping of the chisel. Bit by bit, plank by plank, the monster shrank and crumpled. Over and over during the long night, the boys retraced the devious path to the watchtower, staggering under heavy planks and crossbeams. When the sun rose next morning, the catapult had disappeared without a trace, nor did Roman offers of reward or threats of reprisal produce a single hint of its whereabouts. The boys were wild with success. They swaggered through the village, taking little pains to hide their barked shins and blistered palms. Daniel tried to warn them. "You'll ruin everything," he urged. "This is only the beginning." "Why?" they demanded. "Why can't we strike now? Look at the people. Would one of them give us away? They're just waiting. One word and they'll be with us. Why doesn't Rosh give the word?" Joel sent warnings from the city. The Romans were strengthening their forces. A detachment of foot guards had come up from Tiberias to join the garrison. The road patrol had been doubled. Even in the village, unfamiliar soldiers strolled, apparently without purpose, their eyes alert under their helmets. Daniel insisted there would be no nightly activity for a time. The boys, chafing under the restraint, went scowling about the village. There was an explosive quality in the air. One morning a shepherd hurried into town with a word that three of the town flock had been snared and slaughtered. That morning two men visited Daniel's shop. "They say you can get a message to Rosh if you choose," one began. Daniel did not answer. "If you can, tell him this. He is to leave our sheep alone." "Do you begrudge a sheep now and then?" asked Daniel quietly. "To the man who would give his life for your freedom?" "We have had enough of his brand of freedom. He's free up there, free from the taxes that bleed us dry, free to play with the Romans while we stand and take the punishment. But by the prophets, if you have any fondness of this Savior of yours, warn him now. We have had enough. What are they going to do? Where are they going to put all that wood? Okay. 2 days later, a farmer about to move with his family to man the watchtower in his field came upon his near-ripened crop and found it plundered, trampled, wantonly ruined. Dismayed, Daniel climbed the mountain to take the warning to Rosh, only to have Rosh laugh in his face. They are afraid of their own shadows, Rosh jeered. What good are they but to raise food for men who will fight? They are desperate, Daniel urged. You know they cannot carry arms themselves. They are going to appeal to the centurion for protection. They want him to send legionaries. Let them come, Rosh boasted. Let them get a taste of the mountain. They will only break their teeth on it. Daniel went back to the village, sick at heart. We must hurry, he thought with despair. The whole village is turning against him. If the day does not come soon, they will never follow him. I think that's a good place to stop it. Chapter 18, the first word is late. And that's where we will begin tomorrow. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So 7 chapters remaining. All right. So where are they going to put all that wood? I think they put it in the watchtower. But yes, they disassembled a Roman catapult. JJ says hi. Hi, JJ. Let me know what you think is going to happen in the next 7 chapters. As far as I know, there's not a sequel to this book, so this is it. So we'll have to see. All right. Hey, Becca. Mom says, hey, Becca. So anyway, I will leave you for the evening, and y'all have a good night. Becca, good luck getting your papers turned in. I hope that we haven't kept you up too late or kept you away from it too long. So God bless you guys. Y'all have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow when we get to tell another story. Well, the same story. All right. God bless. Good night.